Welcome back to Grimverse History, where we uncover the strange and forgotten sides of history. Tonight we journey back to ancient Rome, into the hidden and harrowing world of the slave trade, where captured noblewomen faced a fate worse than most could imagine. The Roman slave trade wasn't just about buying and selling bodies, it was about breaking spirits. Imagine a noblewoman, proud and refined, captured in a raid. But what happened to her before the auction, where her worth would be reduced to nothing but a price tag? Was it just an auction, or something far darker? A process designed to strip away every last trace of her dignity, let the noise of your day fade away. You're safe here. If you're intrigued by this dark chapter of history, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another tale from the forgotten corners of time. It's the year 100 at. The streets of Rome are bustling, but in the shadow of the city's grandeur, a cruel reality awaits. The warehouse smells of olive oil, sweat, and fear. It's 146 BCE, 3 weeks after the fall of Corinth. The woman standing in the processing chamber was, until 23 days ago, the wife of a Greek aristocrat whose family had governed the city for 6 generations. Her name is Cleomahake. She is 31 years old. She speaks 4 languages, can quote Homer from memory, and has managed a household of 40 servants. She's negotiated trade agreements for her husband and raised 3 children who are now somewhere in this same warehouse complex. They were separated from her during the initial sorting after the city's capture. She doesn't know where her children are. She hasn't seen them since the second day after the walls fell. She doesn't know if they're alive. All she knows is that she's standing naked in a room with 11 other women, all from families that once commanded respect throughout the Greek world. Now, all of them are property of a Roman slave dealer named Varius Flaccus. All of them are being prepared for an auction in 3 days, right in the city where they once lived. She can feel the cold of the stone floor beneath her feet, can feel the eyes of the dealer's assistants moving among the women. They're using measuring ropes and wax tablets, dampening height, weight, and the dimensions that Roman buyers demand. She can smell the oil rubbed into her skin to make it shine under the auction torches. She can taste the bitter residue of the purgative she drank this morning to empty her bowels for the physical examination she'll endure soon. She sees the implements on the wooden table against the wall: razors, pumice stones, cosmetic pots with unfamiliar substances, thin metal instruments whose purposes she doesn't want to confirm, and chains and collars of various sizes. The dealer enters, Varius Flaccus, surveying his merchandise with the practiced eye of someone who's processed thousands of captives. He's been in the trade for 27 years, purchasing captives from conquered peoples. He knows exactly what Roman buyers want, how to prepare women like Cleo for sale, and how to break them into compliance. He studies her, noting the pride still in her stance. He knows 3 days is enough time to address that. What happens to Cleo over the next 3 days is a dark tale that stretches across centuries of Roman conquest. It's not the marble temples of Rome or the debates of philosophers you're used to hearing about. It's the dark underbelly of Rome, where human beings were processed like commodities, and where noble women like Cleo were systematically broken before being sold. Roman military conquest followed patterns that remain consistent across centuries. When a city fell, its population became the property of the Roman state, to be disposed of as the commander and senate saw fit. The process typically followed a predictable sequence. Military-age men were killed or enslaved for labor, while children were separated from parents and processed as a distinct category of merchandise. Women, especially those from noble or wealthy families, were quickly identified, sorted, and transferred to slave dealers who specialized in preparing high-value merchandise for sale. Cleomahake was identified during the sack of Corinth by her fine clothing and gold jewelry. Seized along with her children and servants, she was transferred to Varius Flaccus, a skilled slave dealer, 6 days after the fall. The purchase price for such noble women ranged from 2,000 to 5,000 denarii, a substantial investment. These women were transported in covered carts to conceal them from view, ensuring no environmental or psychological damage during their journey. Upon arrival at the dealer's processing warehouse, Cleomahake, like the others, was subjected to systematic preparations. The processing began with assessment, which involved evaluating physical and psychological conditions. The captives were examined in full, measured for height, weight, and proportions, and their skin, hair, and teeth were thoroughly inspected. The purpose of this was to document and classify them according to Roman market expectations. Cleometra's soft hands and noble bearing confirmed her high status, but the process didn't stop there. She underwent medical procedures to assess her internal health, a standard practice to ensure full disclosure of any potential issues. The next stage involved transforming their appearance to fit Roman expectations for noble women destined for high-end Roman households. This preparation included hairstyling, clothing changes, and cosmetic treatments. These women were not merely being prepped for a sale. They were being meticulously transformed into property, their identities stripped away in favor of marketable commodities. For Cleomatra, physical preparation began on the morning of her second day in the facility. The first procedure was bathing, a thorough cleaning, using water, oils, and abrasive substances designed to remove not just dirt, but any trace of her former life. The symbolism was deliberate. The woman who emerged from the bathing process was to be clean in ways that went beyond the physical, stripped of the contamination of her previous identity, prepared to receive whatever identity her new owner would assign. The bathing was not gentle. Assistants scrubbed her skin with cloths and pumice, removing dead cells and creating a surface that would absorb the oils and cosmetics that followed. They washed her hair with solutions that stripped natural oils before applying treatments to make it shine. Every part of her body was cleaned with thoroughness that left no area private or protected. Hair removal followed. Roman aesthetic preferences favored minimal body hair on female slaves, particularly those destined for household display. The process used razors, pumice, and substances that pulled hair out by the roots, a painful procedure even for free women who chose it voluntarily, as Roman poet Ovid described. For captives who didn't choose it, the hair removal served additional purposes beyond aesthetic. It was a physical assertion of the dealer's control over the captive's body, a demonstration that what had been private was now subject to commercial requirements. The pain was part of the message. Your body belongs to whoever owns you, and they will modify it according to their preferences, without regard for your comfort. Next came cosmetic preparation. Oil was rubbed into her skin to make it shine under display lighting, and substances were applied to enhance her complexion and hide minor blemishes. Her hair was styled according to Roman preferences, replacing the Greek style, erasing the visual markers of her former identity. The goal was to make her look less like a Greek noblewoman and more like a Roman domestic slave merchandise. This physical preparation also included training for display. Captives were taught how to stand on the auction platform, turn when directed, and hold their bodies in positions that dulgate them to their best advantage. They were trained to respond to standard commands. Buyers would use to inspect them and move in ways that demonstrated physical capability without resistance. This training was enforced through immediate consequences. Captives who did not comply with instructions were corrected, with methods including physical restraint, food or water deprivation, and more severe measures for persistent resistance. The goal was not only physical preparation, but to begin the psychological process of compliance which would continue through the remaining stages. Cleomatra learned the display positions and responses, because the alternative was to be restrained and positioned by force, which was painful and damaging to her dignity. She learned because compliance in small things might allow her to maintain resistance in larger matters. She learned because she had no other choice. The third stage was psychological processing, designed to reduce resistance and create compliance that Roman buyers expected in high-value household slaves. This stage was intensive for noble women like Cleomatra, whose former status had given them habits of command and expectations of respect incompatible with their new position as property. Psychological processing began on her second day and continued into her third day in the facility. The techniques used were documented with precision in Roman sources, revealing a systematic development over generations. Dealers understood that physical coercion alone was insufficient. Buyers wanted slaves who complied willingly, or at least convincingly, not those requiring constant supervision and force. Creating compliance required cybertoidin, The first technique was isolation. Cleomay was separated from the other noblewomen she had been processed with and placed alone in a cell with no human contact except with the dealer's assistants, who came to reinforce the processing. This isolation served multiple purposes. It prevented captives from supporting each other's resistance. It created psychological dependency on the only humans available for interaction. It intensified the sense of helplessness, making other techniques more effective. The second technique was identity denial. Assistants were instructed never to use captives' names, never to acknowledge their former status, never to respond to assertions of identity or appeals based on who they had been. It was referred to only by a number 17, or by generic terms like the Greek or the merchandise. Every attempt she made to assert her identity as a person with a name, a history, a family, was met with blank incomprehension or active denial. The third technique was status demonstration. Captives were required to perform tasks that confirmed their new status, cleaning their own cells, accepting food from bowls on the floor, responding to commands with formulaic expressions of compliance. Each task reinforced the message that their former status was gone, that they were now property subject to the will of whoever owned them. The fourth technique was uncertainty. Captives were not told when they would be sold, to whom they would be sold, or what their future would hold. They were kept in a state of continuous anxiety about circumstances they could not control or obtain information about. This uncertainty created psychological exhaustion, reducing their capacity for resistance. The fifth technique was witness the consequences. Captives who resisted processing were disciplined in ways that other captives could hear and sometimes see the sounds of correction, voices raised in command, sounds of physical contact, and cries of pain communicated clearly what happened to those who did not comply. The message was unambiguous. Resistance produced suffering. Compliant produced relief. Cleomay experienced all of these techniques across 48 hours of processing. She was isolated, denied identity, required to perform status-confirming tasks, kept in uncertainty about everything she cared about, and exposed to the sounds of other captives being corrected for resistance. By the end of the third day, she was ready for display. Not because her spirit was broken. Some core of Cleomay remained intact beneath the compliance she had learned to perform, but because she had learned what the dealers needed her to learn, that visible resistance only made things worse. That compliance was the only strategy offering any possibility of survival. That preserving herself required becoming what they wanted her to appear to be. The dealers called this state market ready. Modern psychologists would call it the beginning of traumatic adaptation to survival response that allows humans to function in circumstances of absolute powerlessness by suppressing parts of themselves that cannot accept what is happening. The auction of captured noblewomen was a specialized event within the broader Roman slave market. Regular auctions of ordinary slaves happened frequently in major market centers. Roman military conquest followed a predictable pattern across centuries of expansion. When a city fell, its population became property of the Roman state to be disposed of according to the commander's judgment. The fate of the women, particularly those of noble families, was grim. They were quickly identified, sorted, and handed over to slave dealers who specialized in preparing high-value human merchandise for sale. Cleomay, captured during the fall of Corinth, was one of these women. Her noble status was clear through her clothing and jewelry, and she was quickly seized. After 6 days, she was bought by a Roman dealer named Gaius Varius Flaccus, who had a long history in the slave trade. The facility where Cleomay was held mirrored others from the time, combining a warehouse, workshop, and preparation center. These centers were designed to clean, groom, and prepare captives according to Roman market expectation. Cleomay's processing began with a thorough cleansing to strip her of her former identity. Her skin was scrubbed, her hair was shaved, and any traces of her former life were removed. The goal was to transform her appearance into something that would be more acceptable for the Roman buyers. She underwent cosmetic treatments, and her body was measured and examined in detail to assess her market potential. The processing also included psychological techniques. Cleomay was isolated and denied her identity. She was treated as an object, her name replaced with a number, and she was forced to perform tasks that reinforced her status as property. The psychological techniques used on her were designed to break her spirit and create compliance. After 3 days of processing, Cleomac was ready for the auction. She had been transformed into the image the Romans wanted to see, a compliant, beautiful object for sale. The auction was a public spectacle where her value would be determined by her appearance, skills, and how well she had been prepared. The dealer knew exactly what Roman buyers wanted and maximized her value through meticulous preparation. Roman military conquest followed consistent patterns. When a city fell, its population became property of the Roman state, disposed of as the commander saw fit. Men were often killed or enslaved for labor, while women, particularly those from noble or wealthy families, were sorted and transferred to slave dealers. Roman officers quickly identified noblewomen based on clothing, jewelry, and physical features. Cleomac, captured during the fall of Corinth, was identified by her fine clothing and gold jewelry. Seized with her children and servants, she was sold to a dealer named Gasperius Flaccus 6 days later. Cleomac was transported to the dealer's processing warehouse in secrecy, concealed from competitors and the psychological toll of seeing her city's destruction. At the facility, she was kept isolated and stripped of her identity. The processing began with a thorough cleaning, scrubbing away any traces of her former life. Hair was shaved, body hair removed, and cosmetics applied to make her appear more like a Roman slave than a Greek noblewoman. Psychological preparation followed, breaking her spirit and establishing her as property. She was denied her name and forced to perform tasks to demonstrate compliance. Over 3 days, Cleomac's resistance was broken, and she learned to comply in order to survive. After being evaluated, she was sold at auction for 12,000 denarii to a Roman senator named Lucius Aurelius Cata. Cleomac's story, like that of many others, reveals the brutal practices employed by Roman slave traders to transform free people into compliant property for wealthy buyers. Roman military conquest followed consistent patterns. When cities fell, their populations became property of the Roman state, disposed of at the commander's discretion. Noble women in particular were identified quickly, their value determined by clothing, jewelry, and physical traits. Cleomac, a 31-year-old Greek noblewoman, was seized after the fall of Corinth, separated from her children, and processed by Roman slave dealers. This involved rigorous physical preparation, which included cleansing, grooming, hair removal, and psychological conditioning to strip away their former identities. The goal was compliance, achieved through techniques such as isolation, identity, denial, and the use of uncertainty to create anxiety. Cleomac, along with other noble women, was sold at auction, where buyers examined captors in front of crowds, evaluating their physical and mental attributes. Roman dealers had perfected these methods, developed over generations, to turn captors into merchandise objects, to be sold to the highest bidder. The Roman sources document these practices with unsettling precision, revealing the systematic violence used to dehumanize women and transform them into compliant property. Despite the methods used to break their resistance, many women like Cleomac managed to survive, yet their stories serve as a grim reminder of the dehumanizing process these women endured. Treated as commodities rather than individuals, their lives, hopes, and identities were erased in service to Roman commerce. The air in the darkened room is still. A whisper of time lingers as if the world outside waits, holding its breath. The cold stone beneath your feet, the silence in the air are reminders of the journey we've just walked through. You can almost hear the faint clink of chains, the distant murmurs of a past that cannot be erased. Take a deep breath, let the tension melt away. Feel the weight of the past fade, leaving only the quiet peace of the present. If this journey has moved you, leave a like, share the story, and don't forget to subscribe. Come back to us when you're ready for another whisper from history. Goodbye. And we will meet again.